here. Oh, that's okay. So we're actually going to go, Jerry's looking ahead and I'm looking back. But kind of a similar, kind of a related topic in the sense of, I think of what Jerry's talking about as a democratization of type. It happens to be on your cell phones. Well, I'm going to talk about the democratization of typesetting in the 60s and 70s primarily. Before I start, here I'm going to try to use this newfangled thing. All right. I'm coming from a background in independent publishing. So I made my first zine when I just got out of college, called Rabble Rouser, and then I was the art director for Bitch magazine, which is a feminist response to pop culture. Probably it might seem a little like a rude word, but we're trying to reclaim the word. So this is sort of what my background is an appreciation for getting ideas out that wouldn't normally be covered by a mainstream press. Oh dear. Okay, the other relationship I have to this topic is I started collecting these books. I go to the thrift store a lot. I go all the time, actually. And I started collecting these books and really being fascinated by the processes of graphic design that were being done right before I became a designer. So I started studying design in 1995. And as you probably know, the Mac computer debuted in 1984. And so by the time I started studying, my school had made the transition to a fully digital production method. But these are just some of my books that are basically antiquated, but they tell a really good story of how things were done. We're living in a really democratic time, really, when you think about how easy it is to get your information out to big audiences or small audiences, whether you're using something like InDesign to create a piece of print, or you're using Squarespace to create a website. Obviously, Twitter is probably one of the biggest ways that you can get your ideas out there. We're really spoiled for choice in getting our ideas out. But that hasn't always been the case. The early printing was something that was only in the hands of the precious few, the people who could afford to pay for printing, to pay for a book, which might cost the equivalent of purchasing a farm. I mean, these books were made with an incredible amount of human labor. The materials used to make the book were incredibly expensive and time-consuming to produce, and so it was only the wealthy that had these pieces of writing. But really, our story starts much later than this, when things are still not accessible to the common person. But our story starts with the newspapers who were looking for a way to find a more affordable method of getting their type set. Type was set in, type was set with automated hot type machines like the linotype or the monotype, and there were a lot of strikes happening, and so the publishers of the newspapers were looking for ways to get around these strikes. And the way to do that was to actually find a new way to set type. So that leads us to strike-on, which is a form of cold typesetting. This is the beginning of what is considered the cold type era. So this is just an example. I don't know, how much you may or may not know about the production methods before the computer, but this is an example of someone setting up a mechanical, where images and type would be pasted down together and then be photographed and made into printing plates. And to give you a sense of just how time-consuming it was, this is a little bit of a timeline from the start of a concept. I'm not touching you. There we go. Start of a concept, moving through to the designer's ideation, to comps or mock-ups, to actually getting your type set, which I'll talk a little bit about, getting your imagery made by whether it was a photographer or an illustrator, getting everything scaled to the appropriate size, getting things photographed, then all come pasted up onto a board, which would be photographed, and then that the films that came from that photography were then laid into what is called a flat, stripped into a flat, and then that flat was used to create your printing plate. And this is an example of a paste-up mechanical, just so you can see. And if you come tomorrow to the movie, you'll get a better sense of actually how this was done. Sorry, let me see if I can coax this. Come on. Okay, so we've got layers of type and image coming together on a board with acetate to separate colors. That's what's going on here. So back to cold typography, cold typesetting, I guess. So strike-on is basically another, is describing a form of typesetting that is essentially a typewriter that has more refined typesetting abilities. So what you have here is the Just-A-Writer. And what would happen is the typesetter would enter in all the text into the machine. It would output a piece of paper tape, like a computer, and then that tape would be entered into a second machine, which would then set your type. Another machine that was sort of developing methods around hot type was the executive typewriter made by IBM. They're nice little sexist ad, but nevertheless. What made the executive special was that it offered proportional type. So what you have at the top is a typical type from a typewriter, which has the same, it's monospaced, so it has the same amount of space around every letter. And at the bottom, you have the proportional type spacing, which is going to create a more professional looking document. You could even justify on this typewriter. How many people in here have used a typewriter? Okay, so it's like a quarter maybe. It's not easy and it's stressful, and if you mess up, it's hard to make corrections. So try to imagine justifying type on a typewriter. Another machine that was available at the time was the lithotype, and you can see here she's entering in the type at this machine, and then in the background is her selection of typefaces. So you could interchange typefaces. So you're probably used to looking at a typewriter that has one typeface and one size. These offered the ability to change sizes and even typefaces. Another machine was the Varityper. This is my favorite of the strike-on machines because it looks like an anime monster. And they were popular for the fact that they offered many typeface choices, but still, this was a way to set type when perhaps there was a strike, and the people who were setting your type with a linotype were not coming in, so you would hire scabs to come in and set your type, and those scabs were often women. So kind of an interesting progression for women in the type world as well. This is a 1960s era Varityper, and I like that it still kind of looks like a monster. And these are examples of the fonts that these could snap in and out of the machine. The Varityper company also made this guy, the Coxhead composing machine. The real game changer in Strike-On was this machine, which is the IBM Selectric, and we'll come back to that. While all of this is happening, another form of typesetting is finally making its debut, its commercial debut. It's something that had been in the works for a long time, but was sort of inaccessible until the machines were of a good enough quality to actually set type. So here is a little explanation of what photo typesetting is, or a little diagram that's from the Pocket Pal, which it was a wonderful printing guide that was probably on the desk or shelf of all designers in the 70s and 80s. So what you see here is the font, which is in the back, and it is on a film format. And the font has light being projected through it. We've got a lens turret that allows for the scale of the typeface to be changed. And then that type is projected onto a film or a photosensitive paper. So this was a really big deal. It made the production of typefaces much more affordable. If you compare creating type on a piece of film versus creating type in metal, that is a vastly cheaper production method. So typefaces just exploded in the 60s and 70s because of this more affordable means of production. Here are some examples of different film formats. And again, if you come to the film, you might be able to see them a little more clearly. Some of these, the projector doesn't handle very well. But what they all have in common is that they are some kind of film, glass, or plastic that light can be projected through. And it might be in a sort of segment, or it might be on a disc. But nevertheless, they all kind of work in the basic similar way. And this led to, just a side note, this led to some aesthetic changes in the type, in the design world, which was a love of really tight letter spacing, because it was just simply harder, if not impossible, to do with metal type. But with photo typesetting, you had this ability, and of course with paste up, I'm pretty sure this here is a mechanical, a Herb Lubalin mechanical that would have been cut and pasted together. But just some quick examples of advertising, just run-of-the-mill advertising of the 70s. You can see that the type is set pretty tightly. This ad is unbelievable to me. Another example of tightly set type of the time. I mean, sometimes type was actually overlapping. But back to the industry of typesetting, initially these kinds of systems were incredibly expensive. So the average, unless you ran a typesetting business, this was out of reach financially. So $62,000 in 1963. I don't know what that translates to in 2017, but it is a lot of money. And then just a quick note, you can see there's a Strike-On device there, which existed just as visual feedback so that you knew what you were inputting. Otherwise, you didn't know what was, you wouldn't know what was coming out of the machine. And I put this in here because it just gives you an example of what type galleys would look like when you would receive them back from the printer. So you might get these long sheets of typesetting that were not really in any sort of order, and it would be your job as the designer to cut those up and paste them down. And I also just love the bag that these came in. So what are you going to do if you are a small business, or a mid-sized organization, or an activist, or an artist? That's who I'm interested in for the purposes of this this presentation. Those people could use something like an IBM Selectric Composer, which I mentioned earlier. I just came back to this slide to show you. Some organizations would just use a typewriter. It's like what Jerry was saying, good enough. Sometimes you just got to get the information out there, and even if it isn't the most beautiful type, that's okay. So this was just like a church newsletter that I found. But ultimately, there came a better way to set type at a more affordable cost. And that was this machine, which was the IBM Selectric Composer, and it was a strike-on method of typesetting that allowed for justification. It had proportional spacing, and it was something that you could learn pretty easily, or you could teach other people to use pretty easily. So if you're putting out a publication, and you'll see here in her, right there in the corner are her typefaces. So it had interchangeable typefaces as well. This is a little video of the machine, just so you can see how whoops, let me go back. This is actually not a composer. This is my just regular IBM Selectric. But it's kind of incredible that IBM came up with this technology, putting the whole typeface on this ball. It's called a type element ball. And just an example of what the typefaces look like. And you can see that the type looks pretty good. You've got a decent justification there and body type. Here's their Composer Type Styles portfolio, which we would just call a type specimen. And here is an example of one typeface. And you can you could get the italic and the Roman for that typeface. There was also a type element ball that allowed for ruling, which I haven't actually seen in use, but it is interesting to me because I would imagine that it would just be easier to draw a line with a pen than set this up. But and just to give you, you might be thinking, what? A typewriter it's so fuzzy, the quality isn't very good. But actually the IBM Selectric used carbon ribbon, and so it's a much sharper quality line. It's pretty impressive. When you look at it, it looks almost like it was output, by a laser jet printer. And they continue to develop and support the machine. So eventually there was memory available, so you could actually have the first line. Well, you could type everything in and then make corrections before you went to print. So one of the big proponents of this IBM Selectric that was in the sort of independent publishing world was the Whole Earth Catalog. And the Whole Earth Catalog was this sort of reference book and also a mail order catalog. It was this place that it was very much a DIY resource basically for hippies, and you could get all kinds of materials for creating your own, doing farming or various ways to live outside of the mainstream society. And they were so much about sharing this technology and these ideas that they even had an article on how to make your own Whole Earth Catalog. And they sing the praises of the IBM Selectric and talk about how you can lease a composer for $150 a month. So think about that price difference between a photo typesetting machine and this guy. Well, that looks pretty good enough for getting your ideals out to the rest of the world. Another form of typography or of type that was really instrumental in getting type in the hands of the regular person was dry transfer type. And you might know it as letraset. but there were many brands. Letraset was just a brand. And basically, the type came on sheets of paper like this, which you could rub down onto your layout. It sounds a lot easier than it is. It's something that you really have to practice at to get. Think about aligning a baseline. Well, you probably don't have to because you work on a computer, but imagine doing that one by one. Oops, letter by letter. Sorry. So this is another example. Zipatone is a brand. Chartpak is a brand. And these brands, or this is a Letraset ad, but you can see all the kinds of uses that they were advertising for their audience. So really, initially they were marketing to the designers, but they realized, oh, hey, we can actually get this out to, you know, the moms and the kids and the business people, etc. Maybe a new chord, huh? It's a great way to learn how to letter space type. If you have never had to do that, yay. It's something you can just actually order. You can find this stuff on eBay, and if you wanted to really force yourself to really think about letter spacing and kerning, this is a great way to do it. So here's some more examples of products that they had, and the company grew and grew, and they added all kinds of products. In fact, they even made it into the digital realm for a little while, but they didn't survive against Adobe. Here's some tools that were being used to sort of help you get better alignment. But just some examples of the kind of work that was being done with these. Perhaps not super refined design, but these are pieces by artists in Britain. And one is by a women's art collective in London. And another is an advertisement for a exhibition by a designer or an artist in London. Another thing is, you know, this might be a way to get your typeset if it was difficult for you to get a type shop to take your work. So think about communities that were having a hard time getting their typeset. This might be the way to get your work printed. And then, of course, we probably associate dry transfer type the most today with punk typography, which really just came about you know, through this sort of playful use of a tool that you know, was really meant for designers, and it gave birth to this whole other form of expression. There were also some display typesetting machines, photo typesetting machines that were a little more affordable for the kind of folks that I was talking about. So what these were photo typesetting machines that would set just display type, just headlines. This was the first one that came about in 1959. But the sort of queen of them all was the phototypositor. And you can see here that she is looking into this viewfinder where she can see each letter. She's going to set each letter that is being projected onto a piece of photo paper. And it's all on this roll of, the type is all on a film roll. And you could I was going to say you could export it. You could have, you know, you could create a film positive, negative, paper negative, or paper positive from this machine. And this allowed for some tricks that could be done that, if any of you are type designers, this is probably a painful page to look at, but you could stretch type up, you could stretch it out, you could create false italics, you could create some sort of wild baselines, but, you know, most importantly, as I said, was this letter spacing ability. It also, they sort of advertised it as a way to get rid of your lettering artist, which is kind of sad. But here they're saying, they're saying all the typography in this advertisement, other than the body, was set on the phototypositor, and it can work 24 hours a day, year round, it says. Another machine was the ProType. It's a little hard to see the image, but she's holding a light that will project through the typeface. But the most affordable typesetting machine in this category was the strip printer. And so this guy's bummed because he spent $1,500, but he should have gotten this machine, which you can see here she's holding the font on the film. And this machine was less sophisticated, and the typography it produced wasn't quite as flexible. But if you're a small, say, a business, and you need to create advertisements, or or if you're a mid-size organization and you create a lot of ads, but you don't want to keep paying a typesetter to do it, you could get this machine. This is what it looks like. And so you'd have to work in a darkened room. So it's not that easy to get good results with something like this. And there it is, only $329. And lastly, there is another Varityper machine. It's called the Varityper Headliner. And so Varityper advertised that you could have your whole type composition department with these two desktop machines, essentially. One to set your body type and one to set your headline type. Some other tools that helped sort of with the democratization of design, really. This is an image showing sort of what a studio might have looked like. And that's a lot of tools, but there were a few that you could use to help get your design together perhaps with less skill. And so there are these kinds of tapes that could be used for rules. There was film that could be used to create the color tones within your design. Textures, and this would be really important. These textures are really great for if you're a publication that doesn't have a lot of money to pay for full color. How do you get some variety on your page? This Letrotone could allow a lot of options for that, just so you can see how that might work. And then, of course, you had to have your technical pens to draw all the lines. So the counterculture and the underground publishing was what was interesting to me in terms of the democratization of typesetting. And these are just some publications. Amazon Quarterly, they went a little wild with their type selection here, but it's interesting to see. They also had an article on how to make your own magazine. So they're not trying to own the publishing, they're trying to make it open. And there was a lot of mixing of hand lettering and hand lettering, dry transfer type, and strike-on typography. And it's a little rough around the edges, but it's got a lot of life to it, and it really speaks to the generation and to the people who are making it. Again, groups that were probably didn't have a lot of money but wanted to get their message out. So gay publications, feminist publications. Radical librarians. I like this experiment with dry transfer. This would have been, to get this many typefaces from a typesetter, going to a business would have been exorbitantly expensive. So, but they had, maybe they had 10 sheets, maybe more than 10 sheets of dry transfer type. And some of these publications offered typesetting services. Again, not very refined typesetting, but you could send in your manuscript or your typewritten text, and they would send back text that was justified or had italics, and just some other publications of that. Oz was a popular counterculture publication that started in Australia, but ended up most of its tenure in the UK. And I just love this mixture of the really sort of raw hand lettering with the dry transfer type. Again, mixing and matching those. And one of my particular favorites is the Black Panther newspaper, which was designed by Emory Douglas. And it's best known for his really bold and beautiful illustrations. But he had very little money, and he was doing most of the work himself, or he would have to train other Black Panthers to help him put the publication together. So they were using dry transfer and IBM Selectrics to get this thing together. Here's an example of a clip out order form. And this is, this was important, this was important information. Here they are sharing their 10 points of demands for their organization. You can see the mix and match of strike on with the dry transfer. And I just learned that he preferred this brand format because he liked these rules here to help him align the type. Another place that I just happened to notice recently, some Selectric type is on psychedelic posters from California mostly. I just found this poster and bought it in a store recently, and I was really excited to see that at the bottom here, the type, this is the information that has to be on there. It's where to buy your tickets to go see these bands. They're not going to spend time putting that information. They don't want to spend the beautiful real estate of the poster with that information, so they just push it right down here with an IBM Selectric. There's a little bit of dry transfer type here as well. But most of these psychedelic posters are all done completely by hand. And just so you can see sort of an example, here's a Victor Moscoso showing the film flat and the film and then the final piece. So eventually there became affordable photo typesetting, but it took a while. Here's a Linotron 505, $103,000 to $146,000. And also, where do you put this thing? And there were tons and tons of machines available. It wasn't a question of Mac versus PC. There were over 300 systems available for typesetting. So if you are an activist organization, I mean, you don't have the time or the money to spare to deal with this kind of thing. And this was just a guide put out by the Siebold Report trying to explain what the differences between all these machines were. But eventually there were machines created that were in a more affordable range, so like from $5,000 to $20,000. And that gets into a slightly more affordable range. And what would happen is, as the technology progressed, people would sell their used machines, so you could get even a better deal on a machine like this. So this right here is called the CompuWriter. This was a very affordable machine for the time, $5,000 to $20,000 depending. The Mergenthaler Corporation created their own version of a more affordable typesetting system from $8,700 to $26,000. And I think that's supposed to be Gutenberg. I'm not quite. Oh, it's supposed to be Darwin. Oh yeah, the evolution of typesetting, right? Okay. Another popular machine was Mergenthaler's VIP, and again, a reasonable price with pretty robust features. And if you get an old book, a book from the 70s, you can sometimes get the specifications for how the type was set, and sometimes with what machine. And when I just showed this slide in San Francisco, and someone in the audience had worked for this publisher. She might have even worked on this book. So, so you know, as time is progressing, the tools are getting more affordable. But of course, the machine that really broke everything and changed how design became more and more accessible was this machine, and that's $2,400 roughly. That's a lot less money, but that's another story. So I'll just leave you with these words from Stuart Brand, who is the publisher of Whole Earth Catalog. Stay hungry and stay foolish. And again, if you're interested in the film, this is screening tomorrow night at TCDC, which I'm excited about. I went to the TCDC in the old location. I'm looking forward to seeing the new location. And just a quick note that if you're wondering about the type, it was set with my Ibm Selectric 2, letter Gothic. So it's not an Ibm Selectric, it's just a typewriter, but I have fun using it. Thanks a lot.